In the sun-baked expanse of 1878 New Mexico territory, a letter of promise and the hope for a new beginning brought Sarah Mitchell across the continent on a perilous journey. What awaited her wasn't the cattle rancher she'd been corresponding with for nearly a year, but a freshly dug grave and a town harboring dark secrets. Alone in a harsh frontier, with nothing but her valise and a bundle of faded letters, Sarah's future seemed as barren as the desert itself, until Gabriel Hawks, a half-Comanche rancher with eyes that had witnessed too much suffering, emerged from the lengthening shadows offering sanctuary. But in a land where water rights determined survival and fortunes could change with a single gunshot, Sarah would soon discover that Gabriel's protection came with complications that neither of them could have anticipated. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of a woman who traveled west seeking marriage, only to find herself caught in a web of greed, murder, and an unexpected connection that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love and survival. The stagecoach jolted violently as it hit another deep rut in the dusty road. Sarah Mitchell clutched her worn leather satchel against her chest and braced herself against the wooden seat. Her spine ached from days of travel, and the fine layer of dust that coated everything inside the coach had long since ruined her best traveling dress. "First time out west, ma'am?" The silver-haired gentleman sitting across from her had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah adjusted her hat, now sadly misshapen from being crushed against the coach window during her fitful attempts at sleep. "Most folks born to these parts know better than to wear such fine fabrics for travel," he said with a gentle laugh, nodding at her once navy blue dress, now coated with a reddish-brown film of desert dust. She glanced down at herself and sighed. The dress had been pristine when she'd boarded the train in Pennsylvania 3 weeks ago. "I suppose I have much to learn about life in New Mexico." In truth, Sarah had given little thought to practical matters like appropriate clothing when she had packed her trunks. Her mind had been filled with the promising words from Thomas Caldwell's letters and the hope of a new life, far from the whispers and pitying glances that had followed her in her hometown since John's death at Gettysburg. Thomas Caldwell was a successful cattle rancher outside a settlement called Silver Creek. He had placed an advertisement in an eastern newspaper seeking a bride, and his letter had been straightforward yet kind. Their correspondence over 8 months had grown increasingly warm, and Thomas had written of his growing ranch, the house he had built with his own hands, and how he hoped she would find happiness there. At 30 years old, with the war having claimed so many young men, Sarah had resigned herself to a life of spinsterhood and teaching other women's children. Thomas's letters had rekindled a dream she thought had died with John, the hope for a family of her own. "Silver Creek, folks." The driver's call pulled Sarah from her thoughts. "We'll be stopping at Jenkins' General Store." Sarah's heart quickened. After months of correspondence and weeks of grueling travel, she was finally here. She smoothed her wrinkled dress, knowing it was a hopeless effort, and checked that her hair was at least partially contained beneath her hat. The stagecoach creaked to a halt, and the driver opened the door. "Watch your step, Mom," he said, offering his hand. Sarah stepped down onto the main street of Silver Creek and took in what was to be her new home, a single dirt road lined with weathered wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small bank, and various other establishments stretched out before her. Nothing like the cobblestone streets of her Pennsylvania town, but there was a frontier charm to it that matched Thomas's descriptions. "Miss Mitchell?" A balding man in a worn but clean shirt approached her. He had a pleasant face, but a solemn expression that sent an immediate chill through her. "Yes, that's me," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "Walter Jenkins, owner of the general store and postmaster." He removed his hat and held it against his chest. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Is it about Mr. Caldwell?" Jenkins' eyes dropped. "To the ground. I'm very sorry to tell you this, but Thomas Caldwell passed away 4 days ago. Fever took him quick. We buried him yesterday." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She swayed slightly, and Mr. Jenkins reached out to steady her. "I'm sorry, miss. If we'd known you were already on your way." His voice trailed off, awkwardly. 4 days, she whispered. "Just 4 days. If the train hadn't been delayed in St. Louis, if the stage connections had been faster." "Do you have family back east you can return to?" Jenkins asked gently. The question brought the full weight of her situation crashing down. Her teaching position had been filled. She had sold most of her possessions to finance this journey. Her parents were both gone, and her only sister had moved to California years ago. "No," she said quietly. "There's nothing for me to go back to." Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure we can arrange for you to stay at Mrs. Cooper's boarding house for a few days while you decide what to do. She's a kind woman, though her rates are—" "I can pay," Sarah interrupted, though she knew her funds were limited. She had expected to step into a marriage and a home, not to be stranded in a strange town at the edge of civilization. "There's also the matter of Mr. Caldwell's property," Jenkins continued. "His ranch, the cattle." "What about them?" Sarah asked. Before Jenkins could elaborate, a commotion from the saloon across the street drew their attention. The swinging doors burst open, and a burly man with a wild beard stumbled out, followed by another man who was shouting angrily. "You think you can just take Caldwell's land now that he's dead?" The second man yelled. "The bank has first claim done, and don't you forget it," the bearded man snarled back. "That land was promised to the boss. Caldwell knew he owed Barrett," the man called Dunn retorted. Jenkins shook his head. "I apologize for this display, Miss Mitchell. Thomas Caldwell's death has stirred up some conflicts of interest in our town." "I don't understand," Sarah said, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. "What's going on?" Jenkins sighed deeply. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." He led her into the general store, a well-stocked establishment with shelves of canned goods, tools, fabrics, and other necessities. At the back was a small office where he offered her a seat. "Coffee?" he asked, and she nodded gratefully. While he prepared it, Sarah tried to collect her thoughts. Thomas was dead. Her plans, her future, her hopes, all vanished in an instant. And now there seemed to be some dispute over his property. Jenkins returned with 2 cups of steaming coffee and sat across from her. "Miss Mitchell, Thomas Caldwell was well liked in Silver Creek, but his business dealings had become complicated." Jenkins chose his words carefully. "He borrowed heavily from the bank to expand his cattle operation last year, and then we had a drought. He lost a good portion of his herd. He never mentioned financial troubles in his letters," Sarah said, feeling a small stab of betrayal amidst her grief. "Men don't like to worry their womenfolk with such matters," Jenkins replied. "The point is, with his passing, there are several parties who believe they have claim to his ranch. Harold Simmons at the bank holds the mortgage. Maxwell Barrett, he owns the largest spread in the county, claims Thomas promised him land in exchange for help during the drought. And there are others." "But what about me?" Sarah asked. "Surely, as his intended wife, I have some claim." Jenkins looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Without a formal marriage having taken place, I'm afraid the law doesn't recognize your position as having any legal standing unless Mr. Caldwell left a will naming you specifically." "I see." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Mitchell," Jenkins said, genuine sympathy in his eyes. "If you need employment while you decide what to do, my wife could use help in the store. It's not much, but it would provide you with some income." The offer was kind, but the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had left everything behind for a new life that had evaporated before she even arrived. "I appreciate that, Mr. Jenkins. I may take you up on it." She rose from her chair on unsteady legs. "For now, I think I should get settled at the boarding house." Jenkins nodded. "Of course. I'll have your trunks delivered there. Mrs. Cooper's place is just down the street, the white house with the green shutters." As Sarah left the general store, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Silver Creek seemed different now. No longer the setting of a hopeful new beginning, but a strange and potentially hostile place where she had no connections, no protection. She was halfway to the boarding house when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw a lone rider approaching slowly. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his skin was bronzed by the sun. His features spoke of mixed heritage. The high cheekbones and strong jawline of his native ancestry blended with what might have been Spanish or European lineage. He sat straight and tall in the saddle of a magnificent chestnut stallion, his posture radiating quiet confidence. As he drew closer, Sarah could see his eyes, dark and penetrating, carrying a wariness that made her instinctively step back. There was something in those eyes, a haunted quality that spoke of both strength and suffering. The rider stopped his horse a few feet from her. "Miss Mitchell?" "Yes," she replied, surprised. "How do you know my name?" "This is a small town," he said simply. "News travels fast." He dismounted in one fluid motion and removed his hat. "Gabriel Hawks." "Mr. Hawks," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I don't believe Thomas mentioned you in his letters." A shadow crossed the man's face. "Thomas Caldwell and I weren't exactly friends, but we had an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Sarah asked, suddenly wary. Gabriel Hawks glanced around as if checking who might be listening. "The kind that makes me think you might be in danger now that he's gone." Sarah's breath caught. "Danger? From whom?" "There are men in this town who would kill for Caldwell's land," he said quietly. "Some of them already think they have a claim to it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Caldwell died suddenly, too suddenly." "Mr. Jenkins said it was fever," Sarah said, but a chill ran through her nonetheless. "Did he?" Gabriel's expression remained impassive. "Caldwell was as healthy as a horse when I saw him less than a week ago." Sarah didn't know what to make of this stranger and his insinuations. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Hawks? We've only just met." "Because Thomas Caldwell sent me a letter the day before he died," Gabriel said. "He asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him. Said you were coming west to be his bride, and that he feared he'd made enemies who might not want to see the two of you happy." "Why would he ask you if you weren't friends?" Sarah asked, confusion mingling with her growing unease. "My ranch borders his to the south," Gabriel explained. "I'm Half-Comanche. People in town don't always take kindly to men like me. Caldwell was one of the few who treated me fairly. We helped each other when needed." Sarah studied him carefully. There was an undeniable hardness to him, but also something else, a sense of honor, perhaps. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Hawks?" "I'm suggesting that you be careful who you trust in Silver Creek," he said, "and I'm offering you protection if you want it." "Protection?" Sarah repeated, uncertain. "My ranch house has plenty of room. You'd be safer there than at the boarding house in town, at least until we figure out what really happened to Caldwell and what it means for you." Sarah was taken aback. "Mr. Hawks, I barely know you. It wouldn't be proper for me to stay at your home." My grandmother lives on the property, he said with a slight shrug. Your reputation would be safe, but it's your choice. I'm just keeping a promise to a man who asked for my help. Before Sarah could respond, a shout from down. The street caught their attention. It was Silas Dunn, the man from earlier, and he was striding toward them with purpose, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Hawks!" he bellowed. "What are you doing talking to Caldwell's woman?" Gabriel stepped slightly in front of Sarah, his posture relaxed but alert. "Just being neighborly, Dunn. Something you might try sometime." Dunn sneered. "We don't need your kind of neighborliness around here." He turned to Sarah. "Miss, you should know that Caldwell's ranch is likely to be Mr. Barrett's property soon enough. The bank might hold the papers, but we hold the water. Rights to the creek that runs through that property. Without water, that land ain't worth spit." "Is that why Barrett was so interested in buying it from him while he was alive?" Gabriel asked coolly. "Strange how he suddenly lays claim to it now that Caldwell's dead." Dunn's face reddened. "You watch your mouth, half-breed, or what?" Gabriel's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Dunn spat on the ground and turned back to Sarah. "You'd do well to stay away from this one, miss," he warned. "And if you're thinking you have any claim to Caldwell's property, think again. He died owing debts all over this county." With that, Dunn stormed off toward the saloon. Sarah's heart was racing. The confrontation had been brief but intense, and it confirmed that there was more happening in Silver Creek than a simple case of fever. "Do you see what I mean?" Gabriel asked quietly. "There's something not right about Caldwell's death, and you're caught in the middle of it without even knowing who's who." Sarah took a deep breath. "What would you suggest I do, Mr. Hawks?" "Come to my ranch," he said, "just for a few days, until we can figure out what's really going on. If you decide you want to leave after that, I'll personally escort you to the next stagecoach out of here." Sarah considered her options. Stay at the boarding house in a town where she knew no one and might be in danger, try to make her way back east with limited funds, or trust this stranger who claimed to have promised Thomas he would protect her. None of the choices were ideal, but one offered at least the possibility of answers. "I need to collect my trunks," she said finally. "They're being delivered to the boarding house." Gabriel nodded. "We'll stop there first. I'll wait outside, while you explain to Mrs. Cooper that you've made other arrangements." As they walked toward the boarding house, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. But there was something about Gabriel Hawks, a steadiness, a quiet strength, that made her want to trust him. The sun had disappeared behind the distant mountains, casting the town in deepening shadows. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Sarah Mitchell made her decision. She would go with Gabriel Hawks to his ranch. She would discover the truth about Thomas Caldwell's death, and perhaps in doing so, she would find a path forward in this wild, dangerous territory that was supposed to have been her home. What she couldn't know was that the danger was only beginning, and that before long her life would depend on the protection of a man she had just met, a man with secrets of his own. The journey to Gabriel Hawks' ranch took over an hour, with darkness falling completely before they arrived. Sarah sat beside Gabriel on his wagon, her trunk secured in the back, watching as the town of Silver Creek faded into the distance behind them. Neither spoke much during the ride, each lost in their own thoughts as the wagon wheels crunched over the rough terrain. When they finally crested a small hill, Sarah caught her first glimpse of Hawks Ridge, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. The main house was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure built of timber and adobe, with a wide veranda wrapping around three sides. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. A corral held a few horses that lifted their heads at the sound of the approaching wagon. "It's beautiful," Sarah said softly, genuinely impressed. Gabriel glanced at her, then back at his property. It's taken me 8 years to build it to what you see now. My father left me this land, but not much else. As they drew closer, a figure emerged from the main house. An elderly Native American woman with long, silver-streaked black hair worn in a single braid stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching their approach with an unreadable expression. "That's Morning Sky, my grandmother," Gabriel explained. "She's been with me since I started the ranch. Don't let her manner fool you. She has a good heart." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Sarah down. Her legs were stiff from the long journey, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Gabriel's hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly aware of how close he was. In the moonlight, his features seemed even more pronounced, the strong line of his jaw, the intensity of his dark eyes. He released her arm and stepped back. "Grandmother," he called out, "this is Miss Sarah Mitchell. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's expression didn't change as she looked Sarah up and down. "The woman Thomas Caldwell sent for," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, "though I arrived too late." "Morning." Sky's face softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Come inside. You must be hungry and tired." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. More books than Sarah would have expected to find in a ranch house on the frontier. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "You have quite a library," Sarah remarked, running her fingers along the spines. "My mother's influence," Gabriel said from behind her. "She taught school before she married my father." Was she also? Sarah hesitated, unsure how to ask about his heritage politely. "Comanche? No." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She came west from Boston, met my father when her stagecoach was attacked by bandits. He saved her life." There was an undercurrent of pain in his voice. "They were both gone by the time I was 20. Before Sarah could respond, Morning Sky announced that supper was ready. The dining room was simple but elegant, with a polished oak table and chairs. The meal consisted of venison stew, fresh bread, and wild greens. Simple fare, but delicious. After weeks of travel food, "Mr. Hawks," Sarah said as they ate, "you mentioned that Thomas wrote to you before he died. Did he give any indication that he feared for his life?" Gabriel exchanged a glance with Morning Sky before answering. He didn't say it outright, just that he'd made some decisions that weren't sitting well with certain people in town. What kind of decisions? He refused to sell his water rights to Maxwell Barrett, for one. Barrett has been buying up land. All around the county, but without water, the land is worthless for cattle. Caldwell's property has one of the few year-round creeks in the area. "And the bank?" Sarah asked. "Mr. Jenkins mentioned that Thomas owed the money. Harold Simmons runs the bank in Silver Creek. He and Caldwell had a complicated history. Simmons wanted Caldwell's land for his own reasons, something to do with a railroad coming through. There were rumors that Simmons was putting pressure on Caldwell, calling in loans before they were due." Sarah considered this information. So both Barrett and Simmons had reason to want Thomas's land, but surely neither would have murdered him. "Men have killed for less in these parts," Morning Sky said bluntly when Sarah voiced this thought. "Land, water, gold, they're worth more than human life to some." "But Mr. Jenkins said it was fever," Sarah protested. "Doc Miller is the one who would have determined the cause of death," Gabriel said. "And Doc Miller owes Simmons money for his practice. He might say whatever Simmons tells him to say." The implications were chilling. Sarah set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "What am I to do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I have no claim to Thomas's property, no way to prove anything if he was indeed murdered, and very limited funds to make my way elsewhere. For now, you stay here where it's safe, Gabriel said firmly. Tomorrow, I'll ride into town and see what more I can find out. I know people who won't lie to me, even if they're afraid of Barrett or Simmons. After dinner, Morning Sky showed Sarah to a bedroom on the second floor. It was simple but comfortable, with a large bed, a dresser, and a small writing desk by the window. Her trunk had already been brought up. "Thank you for your hospitality," Sarah said to the older woman. "I know my arrival was unexpected." Morning Sky studied her for a moment. "Gabriel doesn't bring people here. Ever. You must be special." Before Sarah could respond to that puzzling statement, Morning Sky bid her good night and left, closing the door behind her. Alone at last, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning with the day's events. This morning she had been full of hope for a new beginning with Thomas. Now he was dead, possibly murdered, and she was staying in the home of a man she had just met, a man who seemed to have his own mysterious connection to Thomas. From her window, she could see the vast expanse of land that made up the Hawks ranch, silvered by moonlight. In the distance, the dark shapes of mountains loomed against the star-filled sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated her. With a sigh, Sarah began to unpack one of her trunks, seeking her nightclothes. As she did, her fingers brushed against the packet of letters from Thomas that she had brought with her. She pulled them out and sat at the small desk, untying the ribbon that held them together. Reading through them again, she searched for any hint that Thomas had been in trouble or feared for his life. His words were as she remembered, warm, thoughtful, full of plans for their future together. He described the ranch, the house he had built for them, the life they would share. Nothing in his letters suggested fear or danger, yet he had written to Gabriel Hawks, asking him to protect her if anything happened. Why? What had changed between his last letter to her and his death? The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. She quickly gathered the letters and returned them to her trunk before a soft knock came at the door. "Miss Mitchell?" It was Gabriel. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah checked that she was presentable, then opened the door. Gabriel stood in the hallway holding a small wooden box. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I thought you should have this tonight." He held out the box. "It was Thomas's. He asked me to keep it safe for him about 2 weeks ago, said if anything happened to him, it should go to you." Sarah took the box with trembling hands. It was about the size of a book, made of polished walnut with a simple brass latch. "Did he tell you what was inside?" she asked. Gabriel shook his head. "No, only that it contained something that might protect you if he couldn't." Sarah's heart raced. "Thank you for giving this to me." Gabriel nodded, then hesitated, as if he wanted to say more. Finally, he simply said, "Good night, Miss Mitchell. Try to rest. Tomorrow may be a difficult day." After he left, Sarah returned to the desk and placed the box before her. Her fingers traced the smooth wood before finally lifting the latch. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a folded document and a small leather pouch. She opened the document first. It was a deed to Thomas Caldwell's ranch, and at the bottom, dated just 3 weeks ago, was Thomas's signature transferring ownership to Sarah Mitchell, my intended wife. Stunned, Sarah read the document twice more. According to this paper, she owned the Riverside Ranch, but Jenkins had said she had no legal claim without a marriage having taken place. Next, she opened the small leather pouch. Inside was a simple gold band, a wedding ring, and a note in Thomas's handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I am no longer able to welcome you. To our home as I had hoped. I have made enemies here, men who would stop at nothing to take what is mine. I have transferred the deed to the ranch to your name, and I have entrusted this package to Gabriel Hawks, the only man in these parts I trust completely. The enclosed ring was my mother's. I had hoped to place it on your finger myself, but if fate has decided otherwise, please know that in my heart you were already my wife. Be careful who you trust in Silver Creek. Gabriel Hawks may seem a hard man, but he is honorable to his core. Trust him as I have. With all my love, Thomas. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she finished reading. Thomas had tried to protect her even in death, but the deed raised as many questions as it answered. If it was legal, why hadn't Jenkins mentioned it? Did he not know about it, or was he deliberately keeping it from her? And what of Gabriel Hawks? Thomas had trusted him implicitly, yet Gabriel himself had said they weren't friends. What was the nature of their relationship really? Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but the weight of it was comforting somehow, a tangible connection to the man she had hoped to marry. Sleep did not come easily that night. Sarah's dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures and the sound of gunshots. She woke several times, each time reassured by the solid walls of Hawks's house around her, knowing that whatever dangers lurked in Silver Creek, they were, for the moment, held at bay. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from below. Sarah dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinned her hair into a practical bun, and tucked the deed and Thomas's note securely into her pocket before heading downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Morning Sky at the stove and Gabriel seated at a small table, a mug of coffee in his hands. They both looked up as she entered. "Good morning," she said. "I hope I'm not too late for breakfast." "Just in time," Morning Sky replied, placing a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. As Sarah seated herself, Gabriel studied her face. "You look tired. Did you not sleep well?" "I had much to think about," she admitted. After a moment's hesitation, she pulled the deed from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. "Thomas left me his ranch." Gabriel didn't look surprised. He picked up the document and examined it. "This appears in order. It's properly signed and witnessed." "Did you know about this?" Sarah asked. "I suspected," he admitted. "Thomas told me he was planning to put the ranch in your name to protect it from Barrett and Simmons. I didn't know if he'd actually done it before he died." "Why didn't you mention this last night?" "I didn't want to give you false hope, and I needed to be sure of a few things first." Sarah frowned. Such as whether Simmons already knew about this deed. Gabriel's expression was grim. "If he does, it would explain why Thomas died so suddenly, just days before you arrived." The implications were chilling. "You think Mr. Simmons had Thomas killed because of this deed?" "It's possible. With Thomas dead and you not yet arrived, Simmons might have thought he could claim the ranch through the debts Thomas owed the bank. He wouldn't have expected Thomas to have already transferred ownership. But now that I'm here with the deed, now you're in danger," Gabriel finished. "For her. If Simmons is willing to kill once for that land, he won't hesitate to do it again." Morning Sky, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "The woman needs protection, Gabriel. More than just staying here." Gabriel nodded. "I know. That's why I sent for Marshal Wilson early this morning. He should be here by noon." "The federal marshal?" Sarah asked. "Yes, he's a good man, and he's not under Simmons' influence. If there's been a murder, he'll investigate properly." Sarah's mind was racing. "What should I do in the meantime? If this deed is legal, the ranch is mine. I should go there, see it for myself." "That would be foolish," Morning Sky said bluntly. Until we know who killed Thomas Caldwell and why, you're safer here." "Grandmother is right," Gabriel agreed. "Stay here today. Once Marshal Wilson arrives, we can decide the next steps." Sarah wanted to protest but knew they were right. She had no experience with the dangers of this territory, and the thought of facing men like Barrett or Simmons alone was terrifying. "Very well," she conceded. "I'll stay, but I want to know everything you find out." Gabriel finished his coffee and stood. "I need to check the north pasture. One of my hands reported seeing strangers near the property line yesterday." "Do you think it's related to all this?" Sarah asked. "I don't believe in coincidences," he replied grimly. "Not in this territory." He looked at Morning Sky. "Keep the rifle handy." The older woman nodded, and Gabriel left, the sound of his spurs fading as he walked down the hallway. Morning Sky began clearing the breakfast dishes. "He's worried," she said. "I haven't seen him this tense in years." "You've known him a long time?" Sarah asked. "Since he was a boy. His father, John Hawks, saved my son's life during a flood. When both our families suffered losses years later, Gabriel offered me a place here." She glanced at Sarah. "He doesn't trust easily, but once given, his loyalty is unshakable." "Thomas seemed to trust him," Sarah mused. "Thomas Caldwell was a good judge of character. He was one of the few white men who treated Gabriel with respect despite his Comanche blood." Sarah hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "What happened to Gabriel's parents? He mentioned they died when he was 20. Morning Sky's face darkened. "They were murdered. Their ranch burned to the ground. The authorities called it an Indian raid, but Gabriel never believed that. His mother's people wouldn't have harmed her or her son. Does he know who was responsible?" "He has his suspicions." Morning Sky gave Sarah a long look. "Harold Simmons was just starting his bank back then. He needed land for investors coming from the east, just like he needs Thomas's land now." Sarah whispered, "The pieces are beginning to fit together." Morning Sky nodded grimly. History has a way of repeating itself in these parts. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Morning Sky moved quickly to the window, then reached for the rifle that hung above the door. "Stay inside," she ordered, her voice tense. "It's Barrett, and he's brought men with him." From her upstairs window, Sarah watched with growing dread as Maxwell Barrett and his men spread out in front of the house. Morning Sky stood firm on the porch, rifle raised but not yet aimed directly at the intruders. "Where is she, woman?" Barrett demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I know Hawks brought her here." "This is private property," Morning Sky replied calmly. "You and your men need to leave." Barrett laughed, an ugly sound. "You think that rifle scares us? There's 6 of us and 1 of you. Now, I'm not looking to hurt anyone. I just want to talk to Miss Mitchell about Caldwell's ranch." "Mr. Hawks isn't here," Morning Sky said. "Come back when he returns if you have business to discuss." One of Barrett's men, a thin, wiry fellow with a pock-marked face, spat on the ground. "We ain't here to talk to the half-breed. We're here for the woman." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. How did they know she had the deed? Had someone in town seen Thomas give the box to Gabriel, or was this simply about intimidating her as the newcomer who might have a claim to Thomas's property? Whatever the reason, she couldn't let Morning Sky face these men alone. Drawing a deep breath, Sarah checked her appearance in the small mirror, straightened her shoulders, and headed downstairs. "I'm right here, Mr. Barrett," she called out as she stepped onto the porch beside Morning Sky. "There's no need to threaten anyone." Barrett removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Mitchell, we were just discussing your situation." "My situation is none of your concern," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "Oh, but it is. You see, Thomas Caldwell died owing me quite a bit of money. His ranch rightfully belongs to me now. That's between you and the bank, Mr. Barrett. I fail to see how it involves me. Barrett's smile faded. Don't play coy, miss. Word in town is that Caldwell might have left you something. A deed, perhaps. So he did know. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral. I arrived in Silver Creek yesterday to find the man I was supposed to marry already buried. I'm simply trying to decide what to do next. Well, I'd like to make you an offer, Barrett said, taking a step closer to the porch. Morning Sky raised the rifle slightly, halting his advance. If Caldwell did leave you anything, I'm prepared to buy it from you. A fair price, enough to get you settled back east. That's very generous, Sarah replied carefully, but as I said, I'm still considering my options. Don't consider too long, Barrett warned, his friendly facade slipping. This territory isn't kind to women alone. Accidents happen, especially to those who get mixed up with men like Hawks. Is that a threat, Mr. Barrett? Just friendly. Advice, you're new here. You don't know who you can trust. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll give you until tomorrow to think about my offer. After that, things might get complicated. With a nod to his men, Barrett turned and mounted his horse. The others followed suit, but they didn't immediately ride away. Instead, they sat watching the house, as if memorizing its layout. This isn't over, Morning Sky muttered. They're planning something. As if confirming her words, Barrett called out one last time before riding off. Tell Hawks we stopped by, and tell him to remember what happened the last time he got between me and land I wanted. Sarah and Morning Sky remained on the porch until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did Sarah release the breath she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak with relief and delayed fear. You should have stayed upstairs, Morning Sky scolded, but there was respect in her eyes. I couldn't let you face them alone, Sarah replied. What did Barrett mean about the last time Gabriel got between him and land? Morning Sky's expression darkened. 3 years ago, Barrett tried to force a widow, Rebecca Turner, off her land. Gabriel stood up for her, helped her keep the property. Barrett never forgave him for it. What happened to Mrs. Turner? She eventually sold her land to a family from Denver, not to Barrett, and moved to San Francisco to be with her son. Morning Sky shouldered the rifle. Come inside. We need to secure the house in case they come back. As they went back, inside, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Barrett's visit was just the beginning. Where is this Marshal Wilson that Gabriel sent for? Shouldn't he have arrived by now? The nearest federal marshal's office is in Santa Fe. It's a full day's ride. He won't be here until tomorrow at the earliest. Sarah's heart sank. A lot could happen in a day, especially with Barrett and his men watching the ranch. What should we do? Prepare, Morning Sky said simply. She walked to a cabinet in the corner of the main room and unlocked it, revealing several guns and boxes of ammunition. Can you shoot? I've never even held a gun, Sarah admitted. Morning Sky sighed. Then it's time you learned. She selected a small revolver and handed it to Sarah. This is a Remington double Derringer, smaller than most, good for a woman's hand. 2 shots. Sarah took the gun gingerly, surprised by its weight. I don't know if I could actually shoot someone. When it's your life or theirs, you'll find you can, Morning Sky said grimly. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The next hour was spent with Morning Sky, showing Sarah how to load, aim and fire the Derringer. They practiced in the barn, using empty cans as targets. Sarah was a poor shot at first, but gradually improved under Morning Sky's patient instruction. Not bad, the older woman said after Sarah finally hit a can. Keep practicing, I need to prepare lunch. Left alone in the barn, Sarah continued to practice, each shot becoming more accurate as she grew accustomed to the weapon's kick and weight. The activity helped distract her from the fear that had settled in her stomach since Barrett's visit. She was reloading the gun when the barn door opened. Startled, she almost dropped the weapon, then relaxed when she saw it was Gabriel. "Grandmother told me what happened," he said, his expression grim. "Barrett is getting bolder." "He knows about the deed," Sarah replied. "How is that possible?" "Simmons must have told him. They've been working together lately." Gabriel glanced at the derringer in her hands. "I see grandmother has been teaching you to defend yourself." She thought it was necessary. She was right. He moved to stand beside her, gently adjusting her grip on the small gun. "Hold it like this. It will give you better control." His hands were warm and calloused against hers, steady and sure. Sarah was suddenly very aware of his proximity, of the scent of leather and horsehair that clung to him. She swallowed hard and focused on the target. "I've sent one of my hands to look for Marshal Wilson," Gabriel continued, stepping back. "To hurry him along. In the meantime, I think we should move you to Caldwell's ranch." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "I thought you said it wasn't safe." "It's not. But Barrett and his men will be watching this place now. They won't expect us to take you to Caldwell's property. And I need to show you something there. Something that might explain why Thomas was killed." "What is it?" "Better I show you. We'll go at dusk, when we're less likely to be seen." The rest of the afternoon passed in tense preparation. Gabriel and his ranch hands patrolled the property, while Morning Sky packed food and supplies for their journey to Riverside Ranch. Sarah continued practicing with the derringer until her arm ached, determined to be able to defend herself if necessary. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Gabriel returned to the house. "It's time," he said quietly. "I've had the horses brought around back." Morning Sky handed Sarah a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Food, water, and a few other necessities. The derringer is already loaded and in there too." "You're not coming with us?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "Someone needs to stay here to maintain appearances," the older woman replied. "If Barrett or his men come back, they need to think you're still here." Sarah embraced Morning Sky impulsively. "Thank you for everything. Please be careful." "It's you who needs to be careful," Morning Sky said, returning the embrace briefly before stepping back. "Listen to Gabriel. He knows this territory better than anyone." They slipped out the back door of the house as darkness fell. 2 horses waited, already saddled. Gabriel helped Sarah mount before swinging up onto his own horse, a powerful buckskin stallion. "Stay close," he murmured. "We'll take the dry creek bed for the first few miles. It'll hide our tracks." They rode in silence, the only sounds the soft thudding of the horses' hooves on the sandy ground and the occasional cry of a night bird. Sarah had never ridden at night before, and she found it both terrifying and exhilarating. The landscape was transformed by moonlight, familiar shapes becoming strange and mysterious. Gabriel led them along a winding path, sometimes stopping to listen intently before moving on. After what seemed like hours, they crested a ridge, and he held up a hand for her to halt. "Riverside Ranch," he said quietly, pointing to a valley. Below, Sarah peered into the darkness. A small ranch house was visible along with a barn and corral. No lights shone from the windows, and the place had an abandoned feel that sent a shiver down her spine. "It looks so empty," she whispered. "It's been empty since Thomas died," Gabriel replied. "His foreman and the other hands left when they heard the bank might take the property." He nudged his horse forward. "Come on, we'll approach from the east, through that stand of cottonwoods." As they drew closer to the ranch, Sarah could make out more details in the moonlight. The house was smaller than Gabriel's, but well built, with a wide porch and large windows. A garden, now untended, stretched along one side. It was exactly as Thomas had described it in his letters. Gabriel led them to the barn rather than the house. "We'll leave the horses here," he said, dismounting. Less chance of them being spotted if someone comes looking. Inside the barn, he lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. The building was neat and well organized, with stalls for several horses, tack hanging on the walls, and haylofts above. Thomas was a good rancher, Gabriel commented, looking around. Kept everything in order. What did you want to show? Me? Sarah asked, her curiosity growing. It's in the house, but first we need to make sure we're alone. They approached the house cautiously, Gabriel with his rifle ready, Sarah with the Derringer Morning Sky had given her. The front door was locked, but Gabriel produced a key from his pocket. Thomas gave me this, he explained, for emergencies. The interior of the house was dark and still, with furniture covered in sheets to protect it from dust. Gabriel lit another lantern and led Sarah through the rooms. It was a comfortable home, simply but tastefully furnished, with a large stone fireplace in the main room and a well-equipped kitchen. He built all this for you, Gabriel said quietly. He was so sure you would love it here. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. This should have been her home, her life with Thomas. Now it stood empty, waiting for new owners who might never appreciate the care and love that had gone into creating it. You said there was something here that might explain why Thomas was killed, she reminded Gabriel, forcing her thoughts away from what might have been. Gabriel nodded and led her to a small study off the main room. A desk stood against one wall, its surface bare except for an inkwell and a ledger. He moved to a bookshelf and pulled out several volumes, revealing a small safe built into the wall. Behind them, Thomas showed me this once, he said, working the combination. Said if anything happened to him, I should check what was inside. The safe opened with a soft click. Gabriel reached in and pulled out a leather folder. This is what I wanted you to see. Sarah took the folder and opened it on the desk. Inside were maps, letters, and legal documents. She frowned as she examined them. These are surveys and land deeds. Not just any land, Gabriel said. Look at the dates and locations. As Sarah studied the documents more carefully, a pattern emerged. All of the properties were in the county, and all had been purchased within the last year by Thomas Caldwell. I don't understand, she said. Why would Thomas buy all these different parcels of land? Some of them don't even look suitable for ranching. They are not, Gabriel agreed, but they all have one thing in common. He pulled out a larger map and spread it on the desk. Each piece of land sits along the proposed route of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw the line drawn across the map, connecting the scattered properties Thomas had purchased. He was buying land for the railroad. Not exactly. He was buying land the railroad would need. Gabriel's voice was grim. Harold Simmons has been working with the railroad for years, secretly acquiring property along their planned route. When the railroad officially announces the route, land prices will skyrocket. So Thomas was competing with Simmons, Sarah said, understanding dawning, buying the same land Simmons wanted. Yes, and there's more. Gabriel showed her another document. This letter is from the railroad. They were considering changing their route to go through Caldwell's ranch instead of the land Simmons had been acquiring. Because of the water, Sarah realized. They would need water for the steam engines. Exactly. If the railroad chose Caldwell's route, all of Simmons' land investments would be worthless. Gabriel's expression was somber. That's the motive for murder. Simmons stood to lose everything if Caldwell succeeded. The pieces were falling into place. Thomas's death, the sudden interest in his ranch, the pressure on Sarah to sell. It all made sense in light of these documents. We need to take these to Marshal Wilson, she said. They're evidence. Yes, but first we should... A sound from outside interrupted him, the distant but unmistakable noise of approaching horses. Gabriel immediately extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Stay here, he whispered. Don't move. He moved silently to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Men's voices carried faintly on the night air. Gabriel returned to her side. "Barrett and his men," he murmured in her ear. "At least 4 of them. They must have followed us somehow." "What do we do?" Sarah whispered back, fear clutching at her throat. "Take the documents and go out the back door. There's a root cellar about 50 yards behind the house. Hide there while I draw them away. I can't leave you to face them alone." "You have to." His voice was firm. "Those documents are the only proof we have of why Thomas was killed. If anything happens to them or to you, his death was for nothing." Before she could protest further, the crack of a rifle shot split the night, a bullet splintering the window frame and sending shards of wood flying. "Caldwell's woman!" Barrett's voice bellowed from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out now and nobody gets hurt." Gabriel grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. "They're trying to scare us into doing something stupid," he whispered. "Stay low." They crouched as they moved through the darkened house, another shot ringing out behind them. When they reached the kitchen, Gabriel checked the back door and yard. "It looks clear, but they might have men circling around," he said. "When I open the door, run straight for the root cellar. Don't stop, don't look back." "What about you?" Sarah clutched the leather folder to her chest, her heart pounding. "I'll hold them off, then join you." He touched her cheek briefly. "Be ready." Gabriel threw open the door and fired 2 quick shots into the darkness, providing cover. Sarah ran, her skirts gathered in one hand, the precious documents in the other. The night air was cool on her face as she sprinted across the open ground, expecting at any moment to hear a shot or feel a bullet. The root cellar was built into a small hillside, its wooden doors lying flat against the ground. Sarah yanked one open and nearly fell down the steps in her haste. Once inside, she pulled the door closed above her, plunging herself into complete darkness. The cellar smelled of earth and old vegetables. Sarah felt her way to the far wall and huddled there, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. The gunfire continued outside, one shot then another, then a rapid succession that made her flinch with each crack. Minutes stretched endlessly. The shooting seemed to move away from the house, then back again. Sarah clutched the derringer, her palms slick with sweat. What was happening? Was Gabriel alive? Had Barrett and his men found him? A sudden silence fell, more terrifying than the gunfire. Sarah strained to hear anything, voices, footsteps, horses, but there was nothing. The silence stretched on until she began to wonder if both sides had somehow killed each other, leaving her alone. Then, so faint she almost missed it, came the sound of approaching footsteps. Someone walking directly toward the root cellar, heavy boots on dirt, moving slowly but deliberately. Sarah raised the derringer, aiming it at the doors above her, her finger trembling on the trigger as one of the doors creaked open, allowing a sliver of moonlight to penetrate the darkness. "Sarah?" Gabriel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you in there?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes," she whispered back. The door opened wider, and Gabriel's silhouette appeared against the night sky. "It's safe for now," he said. "Barrett and his men retreated, but they'll be back with reinforcements." Sarah climbed out of the cellar, still clutching the leather folder. "Are you hurt?" "Just a graze," he said dismissively, though she could see a dark stain on his left sleeve. "We need to move quickly. Our horses might have been spooked by the gunfire. We'll have to go on foot for now." "Where?" "There's an old Comanche cave system about 2 miles from here. We can hide there until morning, then try to reach town and find Marshal Wilson." As they moved away from the ranch, keeping to the shadows, Sarah glanced back at the house that should have been her home. In just 2 days, her life had been turned upside down. She had arrived in Silver Creek expecting to be a bride. Now she was running for her life, clutching evidence of a murder plot with only a Half-Comanche rancher she barely knew for protection. Yet somehow, as Gabriel led her into the wilderness, she felt a strange sense of clarity. Thomas had trusted this man with his life, and now so did she. The night stretched before them, full of dangers but also possibilities, and somewhere in the darkness ahead was the truth about Thomas Caldwell's death. A truth that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. The night air grew colder as Gabriel led Sarah deeper into the rugged terrain beyond Thomas's ranch. They moved in silence, keeping to the shadows cast by the moonlight, stopping occasionally to listen for pursuers. Sarah's city boots were not made for such rough country, and blisters had begun to form on her heels, but she pressed on without complaint. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they reached the base of a steep rock formation. Gabriel paused, scanning the area carefully, before gesturing for Sarah to follow him up a narrow path that twisted between boulders. "Watch your step," he murmured. "The entrance is hidden." The path ended abruptly at what appeared to be a solid rock face. Gabriel moved aside some brush that had been deliberately placed, revealing a dark opening barely large enough for a person to slip through sideways. "It doesn't look like much from out here," he said, "but it opens up inside." He entered first, then reached back to guide Sarah through the narrow passage. Inside, the cave widened dramatically. Gabriel struck a match, illuminating a spacious chamber with a high ceiling. Several smaller passages led off in different directions. "My father showed me this place when I was a boy," Gabriel explained, lighting a small oil lamp he'd pulled from his pack. "It was a sacred site for my mother's people, and later a hiding place during raids. Few outsiders know of its existence." In the soft glow of the lamp, Sarah could see ancient paintings on the walls, handprints, animals, and abstract symbols in red and white pigment. "It's beautiful," she breathed, momentarily forgetting their danger. "The paintings are hundreds of years old," Gabriel said. "My mother's ancestors believed this cave connected our world to the spirit world." He set the lamp on a flat rock. "We should be safe here for the night. Barrett doesn't know about this place." Sarah sank onto a boulder, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The events of the past 2 days crashed over her like a wave. Thomas's death, the discovery of the deed, Barrett's threats, and now their flight through the wilderness. It was almost too much to comprehend. "Here." Gabriel handed her a canteen of water. "Small sips. We need to make it last." She drank gratefully, then remembered his injury. "Your arm. Let me see it." He hesitated, then sat beside her and rolled up his sleeve. The bullet had grazed his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow in the muscle. "It needs cleaning," she said, opening the bundle Morning Sky had packed. Inside, among the food and water, she found a small medical kit. "Mrs. Sky thinks of everything. She saved my life more than once," Gabriel said with a hint of a smile. Sarah cleaned the wound with water and a strip of cloth, then applied a salve from the kit. Gabriel winced but made no sound as she worked. "You've done this before," he observed. "I volunteered as a nurse during the last year of the war," she explained. "I saw far worse injuries than this." She tied a bandage around his arm. "There, it should heal clean now." "Thank you." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that startled Sarah with its intensity. She looked away first, busying herself with returning the medical supplies to the bundle. "You should try to rest," Gabriel said after a moment. "I'll keep watch." "What about you? You're injured and haven't slept either." "I'm used to going without sleep." Comanche warriors learned to stay alert for days when necessary. Sarah wanted to argue but couldn't deny her own exhaustion. She arranged her skirts as best she could and used the bundle as a pillow, settling onto a relatively flat area of the cave floor. "I'll wake you at dawn," Gabriel promised, moving to sit near the cave entrance where he could watch for any sign of pursuers. Despite her fatigue, sleep didn't come easily. Sarah's mind raced with questions and fears. What would happen tomorrow? Would they be able to reach Marshal Wilson? Would the documents they carried be enough to prove Simmons' involvement in Thomas's death? And beneath these practical concerns lay deeper, more troubling thoughts. Thoughts about Gabriel Hawks, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his eyes seemed to see through her carefully maintained composure. She had come to New Mexico to marry Thomas Caldwell, a man she knew only through his letters. Now Thomas was gone, and she found herself placing her trust, perhaps even her life, in the hands of this mysterious Half-Comanche rancher. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her churning thoughts, and she drifted into a fitful sleep filled with disjointed dreams of gunfire, running horses, and dark, watchful eyes. When Gabriel woke her, the faint grey light of pre-dawn was filtering through the cave entrance. For a moment, Sarah was disoriented, confused by the hard stone beneath her and the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's time," Gabriel said softly, helping her to her feet. "We need to move while it's still early. With luck, we can reach town before Barrett organizes a full search." Sarah stretched her stiff limbs, wincing at the soreness in muscles unaccustomed to such exertion. Her dress was dirty and torn in places. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and she knew she must look frightful, but such concerns seemed trivial now with their lives potentially at stake. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and dried fruit from Morning Sky's bundle, then gathered their few possessions. The leather folder with Thomas's documents was carefully tucked inside Sarah's bodice, the safest place she could think to carry it. "What's our plan?" she asked as they prepared to leave the cave. "We'll follow Coyote Creek down to the valley," Gabriel explained. "It's longer than going directly across open country, but it offers more cover. Once we reach the valley, we're only about 3 miles from town. And when we get to town, we can't simply walk into the sheriff's office, not if Simmons has influence there." "No," Gabriel agreed. "We need to find Marshal Wilson. If he hasn't arrived yet, there's a telegraph office at the train station. We can send an urgent message to his office in Santa Fe." Sarah's throat tightened as she looked at the gully, still 30 yards away across open ground, then back at Gabriel, his face contorted with pain, blood seeping between his fingers as he clutched his side. "I won't leave you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "The documents," Gabriel began, "are worthless if we're both dead," Sarah interrupted. She tore a strip from her already tattered petticoat and pressed it against his wound. "Can you walk at all?" Gabriel grimaced. "Not without help." "Then we help each other." She positioned herself under his arm. "Lean on me." He was heavier than she expected, but desperation gave her strength. With Gabriel leaning heavily against her, they made their way slowly toward the wash, exposed and vulnerable. The gunmen seemed momentarily confused by their tactic. Perhaps they had expected Gabriel to stay behind while Sarah escaped, or for both of them to scatter in different directions. The hesitation bought them precious seconds. They had made it halfway to the wash when a bullet kicked up dirt just inches from Sarah's feet. She stumbled, nearly sending them both to the ground, but Gabriel's arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. "Keep moving," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't stop." Sarah drew the derringer with her free hand and fired blindly behind them. The small gun bucked in her hand, the sound pathetically feeble compared to the rifles being fired at them. But it was enough to make one of the gunmen duck for cover. 20 yards, 15, 10. Another shot rang out, and Gabriel groaned, jerking forward as a bullet grazed his shoulder. Sarah staggered under his weight, but kept them moving forward. "Almost there," she gasped, "just a little farther." They half fell, half slid down the steep embankment of the wash, landing hard at the bottom. The dry stream bed was about 7 feet deep, providing cover from the gunfire above. Sarah pulled Gabriel against the earthen wall, out of the direct line of fire. Only then did she realize that her sleeve was soaked with blood, his blood. "You're hit worse than you said," she accused, struggling to catch her breath. Gabriel leaned his head back against the dirt wall, his face ashen. "Would you have left me behind if I'd told you the truth?" "Never," she whispered. She quickly assessed his wounds. The bullet in his side was the most serious. It had entered just below his ribs and remained lodged inside. The second shot had only grazed his shoulder, and the third had torn a furrow along his outer thigh. None appeared immediately fatal, but the side wound was bleeding heavily. "I need to stop the bleeding," she muttered, more to herself than to him. She tore more strips from her petticoat, grateful for the voluminous undergarment that was proving far more useful than fashionable. As she worked, pressing fabric against the wounds and binding them as best she could, she became aware of voices. Above them, the gunmen were calling to each other, planning to circle around and come down into the wash. "They're going to come after us," she said quietly, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Gabriel nodded. His breathing was labored but controlled. "There's a bend in the wash about 50 yards downstream. If we can make it there before they get down here, we might be able to find a place to climb out on the other side." "You can't walk 50 yards, Sarah protested. "I can, if the alternative is dying in this ditch," Gabriel replied, a flash of his usual determination surfacing through the pain. She helped him to his feet, and they began making their way along the wash, staying close to the bank to remain as hidden as possible. Gabriel leaned heavily on her, each step clearly agony, but he moved with grim purpose. They had gone perhaps 20 yards when they heard the sound of boots sliding down the embankment behind them. Sarah looked back and saw one of Barrett's men scrambling down into the wash, rifle in hand. "Run!" Gabriel hissed, pushing her forward. "Not without you." "Then help me move faster." They increased their pace as much as Gabriel's injuries would allow, but it wasn't enough. The gunman spotted them and raised his rifle. "That's far enough," he called. "Stop right there, or I'll put a bullet in both of you." They froze. Sarah felt Gabriel's body tense beside her, felt his hand move subtly toward the knife at his belt. He would try to fight, wounded as he was. He would die trying to protect her. The thought crystallized something inside her. She had spent her entire life following rules, being proper, doing what was expected. She had come west to be a good wife to a man she'd never met. Now that man was dead, and she was about to die in a dry creek bed with a Half-Comanche rancher, who had shown her more kindness and courage in 2 days than most men had in her entire life. It wasn't going to end this way. As the gunman approached, rifle trained on them, Sarah slowly raised her hands in apparent surrender. Then, in one fluid motion, she drew the derringer from where she'd tucked it in her sleeve and fired her last shot. The bullet caught the man high in the chest. He staggered backward, shock spreading across his face, then collapsed to his knees before pitching forward onto the ground. Gabriel stared at her in disbelief. "Where did you learn to shoot?" "Like that?" "I didn't," Sarah replied, her voice shaking slightly. "I was aiming for his shoulder." There was no time to dwell on what she'd done. More voices were coming their way. The other gunmen had heard the shot and were converging on their position. Gabriel bent down with considerable effort and retrieved the fallen man's rifle. "Can you use this?" he asked, holding it out to her. Sarah had never fired a rifle in her life, but she nodded. "If I have to." They continued along the wash, moving as quickly as Gabriel's deteriorating condition would allow. When they reached the bend Gabriel had mentioned, they found what they were looking for, a place where erosion had carved crude, stair-like formations into the bank. "You go first," Gabriel said, handing her the rifle. "Cover me from above." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She climbed awkwardly up the earthen steps, the rifle making the ascent more difficult. When she reached the top, she lay flat on her stomach and pointed the weapon back down into the wash. Gabriel attempted to follow, but his strength was flagging. Halfway up, his foot slipped, and he slid back down several feet, a groan of pain escaping him. "Gabriel!" Sarah called in alarm. "I'm all right," he gasped, though he clearly wasn't. "Just need a minute." But they didn't have a minute. Two more of Barrett's men appeared around the bend, weapons drawn. Sarah leveled the rifle at them, but her hands were shaking. She had no idea if the weapon was even loaded, let alone how to aim it properly. "Don't move!" she shouted, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The men paused, assessing the situation. One of them smirked when he saw her trembling hands. "Lady, you don't know which end of that thing the bullet comes out of, do you?" he called up to her. Before she could respond, the unmistakable sound of galloping horses came from somewhere behind her. The gunmen in the wash heard it too, their expressions shifting from confidence to wariness. "That'll be Barrett with reinforcements," one said, raising his rifle towards Sarah. "Let's finish this and get out of here. Drop your weapons." The command came from behind Sarah, the voice unfamiliar but carrying unmistakable authority. She dared not turn to look, keeping her eyes and the rifle trained on the men below. "United States Marshal, drop your weapons now or we will open fire." The gunmen exchanged a glance, then slowly lowered their rifles to the ground, raising their hands. "Kick them away," ordered the voice. "Then put your hands on your heads and don't move." Only when the men had complied did Sarah risk a glance over her shoulder. 5 riders sat on horseback 20 yards away, all with weapons drawn. The man, in the center, wore a silver badge that caught the sunlight. "Marshal Wilson?" she called uncertainly. The man nodded, his weathered face stern beneath his hat. "Miss Mitchell?" "Yes, please, Gabriel Hawks is injured. He's down in the wash." The marshal dispatched 2 of his men to secure the gunmen, while he and the others rode forward. Marshal Wilson dismounted and knelt beside Sarah at the edge of the wash. "How bad is he hurt?" Wilson asked, peering down at Gabriel. "Gunshot to the side, the bullet's still in him. He's lost a lot of blood." Wilson nodded grimly. "Davis, get down there and help him up. Thompson, bring the wagon around." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. The deputies managed to get Gabriel out of the wash and into a wagon they'd brought along. Sarah climbed in beside him, cradling his head in her lap as the marshal's men secured the prisoners. "How did you find us?" she asked Wilson as he checked Gabriel's wounds. "Morning sky," the marshal replied. "When Gabriel didn't return by dawn, she rode out looking for him. Found signs of a gunfight at Caldwell's ranch and tracked you this far. Met us on the road and led us right to you." As if summoned by her. "Name?" The elderly Comanche woman appeared on horseback, riding up to the wagon. Her stoic expression cracked slightly when she saw Gabriel's condition. "He needs Sister Moon," she said to Wilson, "not the town doctor." Wilson nodded. "The Navajo healer?" "She's closer anyway. We'll take him there." He turned to Sarah. "The documents, did you manage to keep them safe?" Sarah patted her bodice, where the leather folder was still securely tucked. "Yes, they're evidence that Simmons and Barrett wanted Thomas Caldwell's land for the railroad. They prove motive for murder." "Good. I'll need those. But first, let's get Hawks the help he needs." Wilson mounted his horse and gave orders to his men. 2 deputies would take their prisoners back to Silver Creek, while Wilson himself would escort Sarah and Gabriel to the healer. As the wagon began to move, jolting over the uneven ground, Gabriel's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at Sarah, his gaze unfocused. "You're safe," she told him softly. "Marshal Wilson found us. We're taking you to a healer." His lips moved, but no sound came out. Sarah leaned closer. "Thomas," he whispered, "was right about you." "Don't talk," she urged, smoothing the hair from his forehead. "Save your strength." But he seemed determined to speak. "The safe. In his study, there's more." His eyes closed again before he could finish, his head growing heavy in her lap. Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. "Gabriel, Gabriel." "Morning," Skye, who was riding alongside the wagon, reached over and pressed her fingers to his neck. "He lives," she said, "but the journey is hard on him. We must hurry." The wagon picked up speed, bouncing Sarah mercilessly, but she hardly noticed. Her attention was fixed on Gabriel's ashen face, willing him to keep breathing, to stay with her. The Navajo healer's home was a small cabin set against a rocky hillside about 5 miles from where they'd been found. Sister Moon, a tiny, ancient woman with eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, took charge immediately, directing Wilson and Morning Sky to carry Gabriel inside while Sarah hovered anxiously nearby. "You wait, sister," Moon told Sarah firmly, pointing to a bench outside the cabin. "I work better alone." Marshal Wilson stayed with Sarah while Morning Sky assisted the healer inside. He sat beside her on the bench, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "Miss Mitchell," he began, "while we wait, I need to hear everything that's happened, from the beginning." Sarah nodded and began her story, starting with her arrival in Silver Creek just 2 days ago, though it felt like a lifetime, and Thomas's shocking death. She told him about meeting Gabriel, about Barrett's threats, about finding the deed and the documents in the safe. She explained their flight from Barrett's men, the gunfight at Riverside Ranch, and their desperate journey that had led to this moment. Wilson listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly letting her talk. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment, absorbing it all. "That's quite a tale," he said finally, "and it matches what Morning Sky told me, though she didn't know all the details." "You believe me then?" Sarah asked. "I do, and those documents will help prove your case." He sighed heavily. "Harold Simmons has been circling just outside. The law for years. Land swindles, water rights manipulation, even some cattle rustling that couldn't be pinned on him directly. But murder, this might finally be enough to bring him down. And Barrett's just the muscle, dangerous, but not the real threat. It's Simmons who's been orchestrating everything from the shadows." Wilson stood, stretching his back. "Once Hawks is stable, we'll need to get you safely to town. I'll want those documents properly secured and your statement officially recorded." The door to the cabin opened and Morning Sky emerged. Her expression revealed nothing, but there was a weariness in her movements that made Sarah's heart sink. "How is he?" she asked, rising to her feet. "Sister Moon removed the bullet," Morning Sky replied. "Now we wait." "Will he?" Sarah couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Morning Sky's dark eyes met hers. "His spirit is strong. So is his reason to live." She glanced meaningfully at Sarah. "You may see him now, but only briefly. He needs rest." Sarah entered the dimly lit cabin, the smell of herbs and smoke heavy in the air. Gabriel lay on a pallet near the fire, his upper body bare except for bandages wrapped tightly around his midsection. His skin was unnaturally pale, making the Comanche features of his face stand out in sharp relief. Sister Moon was grinding something in a stone mortar. She looked up when Sarah entered and nodded toward Gabriel. "5 minutes," she said firmly. "Then he rest." Sarah knelt beside the pallet. Gabriel's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, but steady. She hesitated, then gently took his hand in hers. His fingers were cool to the touch. "Gabriel," she whispered. His eyelids flickered, then slowly opened. For a moment, he seemed disoriented. Then his gaze focused on her face. "Sarah," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "You're safe." "Thanks to you," she replied, her voice catching. "The marshal is here. He's going to help us." Gabriel's lips curved in a faint smile. "Good." He winced, shifting slightly. "Did I say something about Thomas's safe before I passed out?" "You said there was more, something in his study." He nodded weakly. "There's another compartment, behind the main safe. He showed me once." Said it was where he kept his most valuable possession. What's in it? Don't know. He never opened it in front of me, but he said if anything happened to him, the combination was in the letter he left for you. Sarah frowned, thinking back to the note that had accompanied Thomas's mother's ring. There was nothing about a combination in his letter. Must be hidden somehow, Gabriel murmured, his eyelids growing heavy again. Thomas was careful, always 3 steps ahead. Sister Moon approached, a steaming cup in her hand. Enough talk, she said. He drink this, then sleep. Sarah reluctantly released Gabriel's hand and stood. I'll be back tomorrow, she promised. Outside, Marshal Wilson was deep in conversation with Morning Sky. They both looked up as Sarah emerged from the cabin. How is he? Wilson asked. Weak but alert, she replied. He told me there's another compartment in Thomas's safe, something important that Thomas wanted me to find. Wilson's eyebrows rose. Did he say what? No, but apparently the combination is hidden in the letter Thomas left me. Sarah frowned. I've read it several times. There was nothing about a safe or a combination. Sometimes messages are hidden in plain sight, Morning Sky said. Words that seem ordinary might have another meaning. We'll look into it, Wilson assured her. But right now we need to get you safely to town. I've left 2 deputies here to protect Hawks. Barrett will have more men looking for you both. The ride to Silver Creek was tense, with Wilson and his remaining deputy constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. They took a circuitous route, avoiding the main roads, and entered town from the north, just as the sun was setting. Instead of taking her to the hotel as Sarah expected, Wilson brought her to a small house on the outskirts of town. My sister's place, he explained. She's visiting family in Denver. You'll be safer here than at the hotel, where everyone would know where to find you. The house was modest but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, a small parlor, and a kitchen. Wilson posted his deputy outside while he helped Sarah settle in. I'll send someone to fetch you some necessities, he said. Clothing, toiletries? Is there anything specific you need? Sarah thought for a moment. Could you have someone retrieve Thomas's letter from Gabriel's ranch? Morning Sky would know where it is. I'd like to examine it again, see if I can find this hidden combination. Wilson nodded. I'll take care of it. In the meantime, I need those documents you've been carrying. I'll lock them in my office safe overnight, and tomorrow we'll use them to get arrest warrants for Simmons and Barrett. Sarah handed over the leather folder. What happens next? Tomorrow I'll take your official statement. Then we'll confront Simmons with what we know. Wilson's expression hardened. Men like him think they're untouchable. It's time he learned otherwise. After the marshal left, Sarah found herself alone for the first time in days. The silence of the house was almost oppressive after the constant tension and movement of her flight with Gabriel. She explored the small dwelling, finding clean linens in a chest and a pantry stocked with basic provisions. She managed to heat water for a bath, scrubbing away the dirt and dried blood that caked her skin. The warm water soothed her aching muscles, but did little to calm her racing thoughts. Concern for Gabriel, uncertainty about her future, and lingering fear of Barrett and his men all competed for her attention. As she dressed in a borrowed nightgown found in a drawer, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a small mirror. She hardly recognized herself. The prim, proper schoolteacher who had boarded a train in Pennsylvania seemed like a stranger now. The woman who stared back at her had shadows under her eyes and a new hardness in her expression, but also a confidence that hadn't been there before. She had survived. She had fought back, and she wasn't finished yet. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Cautiously she approached. Who is it? Deputy Morris, ma'am. Marshal Wilson sent me with some things for you. She cracked the door, Verifying the deputy's identity before opening it fully, he handed her a small bundle. "Just some clothing. Mrs. Larson at the hotel put together for you, and some food from the cafe," he explained. "And this," he handed her an envelope. "Morning Sky sent it. Said it was what you asked for." Sarah thanked him and closed the door, eagerly opening the envelope. Inside was Thomas's letter, the paper now creased and worn from her multiple readings. She sat at the small kitchen table, reading it again. By lamplight, "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I am no longer able to welcome you to our home as I had hoped. I have made enemies here, men who would stop at nothing to take what is mine. I have transferred the deed to the ranch to your name, and I have entrusted this package to Gabriel Hawks, the only man in these parts I trust completely. The enclosed ring was my mother's. I had hoped to place it on your finger myself, but if fate has decided otherwise, please know that in my heart you were already my wife. Be careful who you trust in Silver Creek. Gabriel Hawks may seem a hard man, but he is honorable to his core. Trust him as I have. With all my love, Thomas." Nothing. About a safe combination jumped out at her. She read it again, trying to see beyond the words, looking for patterns or oddities that might indicate a hidden message. As she was about to set it aside in frustration, a thought occurred to her. The letter had mentioned 3 specific people: herself, Gabriel, and Thomas's mother. 3 names, and Gabriel had said Thomas was always 3 steps ahead. Could it be that simple? She counted the words in the letter. Sarah was the 7th word. Gabriel was the 65th. Mother was the 83rd. 7, 65, 83. It was worth a try. She wrote the numbers down carefully, then set the letter aside and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be a crucial day, and she needed her rest. Morning brought Deputy Morris knocking at her door again, this time with a fresh dress borrowed from Mrs. Larson and breakfast from the cafe. He informed her that Marshal Wilson would come for her at 10 o'clock to take her statement officially. Then they would confront Simmons. "Any news of Gabriel Hawks?" she asked anxiously. "Still alive, last we heard," Morris replied. "That's all I know, ma'am." Sarah ate little, her stomach knotted with anticipation. At precisely 10, Marshal Wilson arrived, looking grim but determined. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, retrieving Thomas's letter and the numbers she'd written down. "I think I've found a combination," she told him, explaining her reasoning. Wilson studied the numbers thoughtfully. "Could be. We'll check it after we've dealt with Simmons. But first, we need to get your statement properly recorded." At the marshal's office, Sarah recounted her story again, this time with Wilson's clerk, taking detailed notes. When she finished, Wilson had her review and sign the document. "Now," he said, "we're going to pay a visit to the bank. Simmons usually spends his mornings there, trying to look like a respectable businessman." Sarah hesitated. "Should I come with you? Won't that put me in danger?" "You're already in danger," Wilson replied frankly, "but having you there will rattle him, make him more likely to slip up, and I'll have 3 deputies with us." Silver Creek National Bank was an imposing structure for such a small town, a stone building with columns flanking the entrance, designed to project stability and wealth. Inside, the marble floors and polished oak counters continued the illusion of grandeur. Harold Simmons' office was at the rear, behind a frosted glass door bearing his name in gold lettering. Wilson didn't bother to knock. He strode in, his deputies flanking him, with Sarah following close behind. Simmons looked up from his desk, momentary surprise quickly masked by practiced civility. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with cold eyes that assessed them like a predator sizing up potential threats. "Marshal Wilson," he said smoothly. "This is an unexpected pleasure." His gaze shifted to Sarah, hardening slightly. And Miss Mitchell, I presume? I heard you had arrived in town. My condolences on the loss of Mr. Caldwell. Save your condolences, Simmons, Wilson said bluntly. We have evidence that you conspired with Maxwell Barrett to murder Thomas Caldwell. Simmons' expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. That's a serious accusation, Marshal. I assume you have more than the word of this newcomer to back it up? We have documents proving you and Barrett were buying land along the proposed railroad route. We have evidence that Caldwell was competing with you, purchasing key properties that threatened your investment. And we have a witness who saw Barrett's men at Caldwell's ranch the night before he supposedly fell ill. Business competition is hardly motive for murder, Simmons replied. And even if Barrett did something foolish, that has nothing to do with me. We also have the testimony of Dr. Miller, Wilson continued, bluffing slightly. He's considering cooperating to save his own neck. That hit home. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Simmons's face before he mastered himself. I don't know what Miller told you, but I assure you, your minds, Simmons, Sarah interrupted, the realization suddenly dawning on her. That's what this is really about, isn't it? The silver mines you've been trying to reopen. Both men turned to look at her with surprise. Thomas's documents showed the railroad route, she continued, thinking aloud. But what caught my attention were the survey maps of the surrounding territory. They showed old mine shafts all through the Sierra Peaks, mines that had been abandoned decades ago when they ran out of silver. Except they didn't run out, did they? The mining technology of the time just couldn't reach the deeper veins. Simmons' face had gone very still. With modern equipment, those mines could be profitable again, Sarah went on, but only if you had a way to transport the ore economically. You needed the railroad to build a spur line to your mines. And for that to happen, they needed to follow a specific route. The route that ran through Thomas's land. Wilson was looking at her with newfound respect. Is that true, Simmons? You've been acquiring those old mining claims. Simmons stood abruptly. This is absurd. You have no proof of any wrongdoing on my part. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a bank to run. Sit down, Wilson ordered. You're not going anywhere. I have warrants for your arrest, and Barrett's on suspicion of conspiracy and murder. On what grounds? The speculation of a woman who's been in Silver Creek for all of 2 days. Simmons scoffed, but there was sweat beading on his forehead now. On the grounds of these documents, Wilson replied, producing the leather folder from his coat, and the testimony we'll be getting from your associates once they realize you're going down and start looking to save themselves. Simmons lunged, suddenly reaching for a drawer in his desk. Wilson was faster, drawing his pistol and leveling it at the banker. Don't, he warned. Simmons froze, then slowly raised his hands. You're making a mistake, Marshal. I have powerful friends. This won't end well for you. Maybe not, Wilson agreed, but it's ending a lot worse for you. He nodded to his deputies. Take him to the jail and send men to Barrett's ranch to bring him in too. As the deputies led Simmons away, Sarah found herself trembling slightly. With the release of tension, it wasn't over. There would be a trial, and men like Simmons rarely went quietly. But it was a start. Are you all right? Wilson asked, noticing her reaction. She nodded. It's been a lot to take in. 2 days ago, I was a mail-order bride coming to marry a man I'd never met. Now I'm helping arrest the most powerful man in town for murder. Wilson chuckled. Life out west doesn't waste time easing you in. He sobered. You did well, Miss Mitchell. That insight about the mines might be the key to this whole case. I'm not even sure where it came from, she admitted. Something Gabriel said about Thomas being 3 steps ahead. It made me look deeper at those documents, see beyond the obvious. Speaking of 3 steps ahead, Wilson said, let's go check that safe at Caldwell's ranch. See if your combination works and what he thought was valuable enough to hide so carefully. The ride to Riverside Ranch was mercifully uneventful. Wilson had brought 4 deputies with him, taking no chances now that they had Simmons in custody. Barrett's men might still be looking for revenge. The ranch house was as Sarah had last seen it, though in daylight its abandoned state was more apparent. Dust had settled on the furniture covers, and the air inside was stale. Wilson led the way to Thomas's study, 2 deputies standing guard outside while the others checked the rest of the house. The wall safe was where Gabriel had described it, hidden behind a bookshelf. Wilson opened it easily with the combination they already knew, revealing the documents they had examined previously. But now, knowing what to look for, Sarah noticed a small keyhole in the back of the safe that she hadn't seen before. "There," she said, pointing. "That must be the second compartment Gabriel mentioned." Wilson examined it. Not a keyhole. Another combination lock, just smaller. "Want to try your numbers?" Sarah nodded, and Wilson carefully turned the tiny dial. 7 to the right, 65 to the left, 83 to the right. There was a soft click, and a panel in the back of the safe swung open. Inside was a single envelope, sealed with wax, and a small velvet pouch. Wilson handed them both to Sarah. "These were meant for you," he said. With trembling fingers, Sarah broke the seal on the envelope and withdrew a letter written in Thomas's now familiar hand. "My dear Sarah, if you are reading this, then you have proven yourself as resourceful and determined as I believed you to be. Gabriel must have helped you, and for that I am grateful. What I couldn't tell you in my first letter, for fear it would be intercepted, is that I discovered something that could change Silver Creek forever. The enclosed pouch contains samples and the location of a silver deposit richer than any previously found in these mountains. It lies beneath Riverside Ranch, unknown to anyone but me. I had planned for us to develop it together, building a future, not just for ourselves, but for the entire community. Now that responsibility falls to you alone. Use it wisely, Sarah. There will be those who try to take it from you by any means necessary, as they likely tried to take it from me. The deed I left you ensures the land and everything beneath it is legally yours. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. I trust you will make the right one. With deepest affection and respect, Thomas." Sarah opened the velvet pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. Several small, rough chunks of ore glittered in the light, streaked with unmistakable veins of silver. Beneath them was a folded map marked with precise coordinates. "My God," Wilson breathed, looking over her shoulder. "No wonder Simmons wanted this land so badly. If he knew or even suspected." "He didn't know," Sarah said with certainty. "If he had, he would have tried to buy the ranch directly instead of working through the railroad scheme. He must have only suspected there might be silver here, based on the surrounding geology." She carefully returned the samples and map to the pouch. "Thomas kept this secret from everyone. Even Gabriel doesn't know." "Oh, what will you do?" Wilson asked quietly. Sarah considered the question. The silver deposit represented wealth beyond anything she had ever imagined. Financial independence, security, power. But it also represented responsibility, difficult decisions, and likely more danger. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I won't decide anything until Gabriel recovers. He deserves to know the full truth and—" She hesitated. "I value his counsel." Wilson nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Of course. For now, let's secure these items and get back to town. I want to check on Simmons and see if our men have brought Barrett in yet." They rode back to Silver Creek in the late afternoon, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. The town seemed different to Sarah now, no longer a strange, hostile place, but a community with potential, with a future she might be part of. At the marshal's office, they found that Barrett had been apprehended without incident. apparently having decided that surrendering was preferable to facing Wilson's deputies in a gunfight. He was being held in a cell separate from Simmons and already showing signs of being willing to cooperate in exchange for leniency. "He's not a brave man when his back's against the wall," Wilson observed. "My guess is he'll tell us everything we want to know about Simmons's operation in exchange for avoiding the hangman's noose." A deputy approached with news that Gabriel was improving. The healer believed he would recover fully with time and rest. "She says you can visit him tomorrow," the deputy told Sarah, "but not to expect him to be up and about for at least a week." Relief washed over her. Gabriel would live. The knowledge settled something inside her, a fear she had been carrying since seeing him fall wounded beneath Barrett's men's bullets. Wilson arranged for Sarah to spend another night at his sister's house with 2 deputies standing guard. Before they parted, he asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them all day. "Will you stay in Silver Creek, Miss Mitchell, once this is all settled, I mean?" Sarah considered the question carefully. 2 days ago, her answer would have been an immediate no. She had come to marry a man who was now dead, and her only thought had been how to extricate herself from a situation gone terribly wrong. But now she had a deed to a prosperous ranch, knowledge of a silver deposit that could transform the region, and connections to people who had risked their lives for her, and for whom she had risked her own in return. And there was Gabriel. Gabriel with his quiet strength, his unwavering honor, his willingness to die protecting a woman he barely knew because he had given his word to a friend. Gabriel, who had shown her a different kind of life than she had ever imagined for herself. "I think I might," she said finally. "Silver Creek could use a school teacher from what I've seen. And I find I'm not ready to leave just yet." Wilson smiled. "The town would be better for it, and I suspect there's a certain Half-Comanche rancher who'd be mighty pleased to hear that decision." Sarah felt color rising to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean, Marshal." "Of course not," Wilson replied with a knowing twinkle in his eye. "Get some rest, Miss Mitchell. Tomorrow's likely to be just as eventful as today." The next morning brought news that Judge Hollister had arrived from Santa Fe, summoned by Wilson's telegram. The judge was a stern, no-nonsense man with a reputation for fairness and a particular dislike for corrupt businessmen. "He set up court in the town hall," Deputy Morris informed Sarah when he came to escort her. "Marshal Wilson wants you there for the initial hearing." The town hall was packed when they arrived, townsfolk eager to witness the proceedings against 2 of the most powerful men in the county. Simmons and Barrett were already there, seated at separate tables with their lawyers. Simmons looked composed but wary, while Barrett appeared distinctly nervous, his eyes darting around the room. "Marshal." Wilson met Sarah at the door. "We've got them," he said quietly. "Barrett broke during the night, confirmed everything. Simmons ordered Caldwell's murder. Had Dr. Miller provide a slow-acting poison that would mimic fever symptoms. Barrett's men administered it over the course of a week, making it look like a natural illness." Sarah felt a cold anger settle in her chest. Will they hang? Barrett's testimony should ensure Simmons does. Barrett himself will likely get life imprisonment in exchange for his cooperation. Wilson guided her to a seat near the front. "Judge Hollister has also issued an order freezing all of Simmons's assets pending the outcome of the trial. His days of running this town are over." The proceedings were brief but decisive. Judge Hollister set a trial date for 2 weeks hence, denied bail for both men, and appointed a special administrator to oversee the bank's operations in Simmons's absence. When it was over, Sarah felt a curious sense of anticlimax. Justice was in motion, but Thomas was still dead, and the future still uncertain. "May I go see Gabriel now?" she asked Wilson. He nodded. "I'll have a deputy take you. The healer's cabin is a bit out of the way." The ride to Sister Moon's cabin took nearly an hour. Sarah spent it lost in thought, trying to make sense of the whirlwind her life had become. When they arrived, Morning Sky was outside gathering herbs. She straightened as Sarah approached, studying her with those penetrating dark eyes. "He is awake," Morning Sky said by way of greeting. "His body heals, his spirit is restless. May I see him?" Morning Sky nodded. "He asks for you, but do not tire him." Inside, the cabin was warmer than Sarah remembered, fragrant with herbs and wood smoke. Gabriel was propped up on the pallet, looking pale, but considerably more alert than the last time she'd seen him. His eyes found hers immediately as she entered. "You're alive," he said, relief evident in his voice. "So are you," she replied, kneeling beside him, though it was a close thing. "Simmons, Barrett, both in custody. Barrett confessed everything. They'll stand trial in 2 weeks." She hesitated, then added, "I found what was in the second compartment of Thomas's safe." Gabriel's eyebrows rose. "What was it?" "Silver," Sarah said simply, "a rich deposit right under Riverside Ranch. That's what Simmons was really after, though I don't think he knew for certain it was there." Gabriel let out a low whistle. "Thomas knew about this?" "He discovered it shortly before he wrote to me, I think. He kept it secret from everyone." "Including me," Gabriel said, a hint of hurt in his voice. "He was protecting you as much as the secret," Sarah assured him. "The fewer people who knew, the safer you all were." Gabriel nodded slowly. "What will you do with this knowledge?" It was the second time she'd been asked that question in 2 days. This time, Sarah had given it more thought. "I'm going to develop the mine," she said with newfound conviction. "But not the way Simmons would have. I want it to benefit the community. Fair wages, safe working conditions, profits invested back into Silver Creek. The town needs a proper school, for one thing." "A school? Are you planning to stay and teach then?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I am. Silver Creek was supposed to be my home. I think it still can be, just not in the way I originally expected." A silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. "When I'm recovered," Gabriel said finally, "I'd like to help you with the ranch. The cattle still need tending, and you'll need someone who knows the territory if you're going to develop that mine properly." "I'd like that," Sarah replied softly. Another pause, more charged than the first. "Sarah," Gabriel began, then seemed to lose his courage. "I know it's too soon. You came here to marry another man, and It is too soon," she agreed gently. "For both of us. But perhaps in time." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm around hers. "In time," he echoed. As autumn gave way to winter, Silver Creek underwent a transformation. With Simmons awaiting trial and Barrett having turned state's evidence, the stranglehold they had maintained over the community began to loosen. People who had long been afraid to speak out against them suddenly found their voices. Sarah's school opened in November in a building purchased with the first proceeds from what was now being called the Caldwell Mine. 28 children from town and the surrounding ranches attended, many of them receiving formal education for the first time. Gabriel recovered slowly but steadily, returning to Hawks Ridge after 3 weeks under Sister Moon's care. He and his ranch hands helped Sarah get Riverside Ranch back in working order, the cattle rounded up and proper management restored. The mine itself was developed carefully, with engineers brought in from Denver to ensure safe operations. As Sarah had promised, the wealth it generated was shared more equitably than was common in mining operations of the time. Miners received fair wages, the town benefited from infrastructure improvements, and Sarah herself lived modestly, content with the knowledge that she was building something that would last. Simmons was convicted at his trial and sentenced to hang, though legal appeals would keep him from the gallows for nearly a year. Barrett received 20 years in a territorial prison, a sentence many considered too lenient, but which Marshall, Wilson assured Sarah was just given the circumstances. Through it all, Sarah and Gabriel's relationship evolved gradually, from tentative friendship to deep mutual respect to something neither of them quite dared to name. He escorted her to town functions, dined at her table once a week, and spent long evenings discussing books, ranching, and the future of Silver Creek. It was on one such evening, nearly 6 months after Sarah's arrival in town, that Gabriel finally spoke what had been in his heart since their desperate flight from Barrett's men. They were sitting on the porch of Riverside Ranch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. A comfortable silence had fallen between them, the kind that only exists between people who no longer feel the need to fill every moment with words. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said at last, his voice quiet but steady, "about what Thomas wrote in his letter to you." Sarah turned to look at him, curious. "Which part?" "Where he said that in his heart you were already his wife." Gabriel met her gaze, his dark eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "I understand that feeling now." Her breath caught. "Gabriel, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he continued quickly. "I know the proper way to court a lady, and I'm willing to take all the time you need. But I wanted you to know that when you are ready, if you ever are, I'll be waiting." Sarah considered her response carefully. 6 months ago, she had been a mail-order bride, coming west to marry a man she knew only through letters. Now she was a mine owner, a school teacher, and a woman who had found strength she never knew she possessed. And beside her sat a man who had nearly died protecting her, who had shown her what real honor looked like, who had never asked for anything in return for his sacrifice. "I don't think we need to wait much longer," she said softly. Gabriel's expression remained carefully composed, but his eyes betrayed his hope. "Are you certain?" In answer, Sarah reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "Thomas chose me for a reason," she said, echoing Gabriel's words from days after her arrival. "He saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself then, but I see it now." She turned to face him fully. "And I see you, Gabriel Hawks, not as a half-Comanche rancher or as Thomas's friend, but as the man I want beside me for whatever comes next." The last light of the sunset caught the tear that slipped down Gabriel's cheek. Without words, he drew her gently into his arms, and as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their lips met in a kiss that tasted of promise and new beginnings. Silver Creek would never be the town Sarah had imagined when she first stepped off the stagecoach. It would be something better, a place built on justice rather than corruption, on shared prosperity rather than greed, on love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. And Sarah Mitchell, who had arrived as a mail-order bride to find her groom dead, had found instead a home, a purpose, and a love that was all the more precious for being unexpected. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.